In Formula One, things don't always go as planned. Scuderia Ferrari clearly demonstrated this last weekend when, at the beautiful circuit on Notre-Dame Island in Quebec, the worst of the worst manifested for the Maranello team in the Canadian Grand Prix, despite the high expectations before the race weekend. The situation was so extreme that it seems almost unbelievable, yet it's all true. The limping Prancing Horse dashed the enthusiasm of millions of fans around the globe in one fell swoop. It did so in such a definitive manner that it will undoubtedly be remembered in the annals of the sport. In a recent podcast episode for an Italian website, the hosts were joined by their esteemed guest, Italian journalist, and well-known Ferrari insider Leo Turrini. The experienced F1 expert recounted the feats of the red team in Montreal, seeking a rational explanation for Scuderia Ferrari's unexpected setback in performance. He delved into the reasons behind this terrifying scenario that affected Ferrari's pace and results at the 4.361-kilometer Circuit Gilles-Villeneuve in Montreal, a team that had shown real competitiveness up to Monte Carlo, with Charles Leclerc securing a splendid race win on the streets of Monaco in front of his home fans, and a Ferrari team that was eager to compete in Canada, with the clear goal of confirming the progress made with the SF24 updates introduced at the Imola circuit a few weeks ago, which up until the Montreal weekend had proven to be effective. According to Leo Turrini, something happened that defies rational explanation. It's understandable that Ferrari might go to Canada and be a bit slower than the McLaren MCL 38 of Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri or Max Verstappen's Red Bull RB20. However, when you realize during Saturday's qualifying session, without any warning, that Williams is faster and the same goes for the Visa Cash app RB cars, and Aston Martin, it means that something seriously went wrong. The only thing missing was for Haas and Stake, powered by the Ferrari 06610 engine, to be faster than the SF24, completing an unbelievably absurd picture at the Circuit Gilles-Villeneuve, one that could not have been anticipated after the Friday free practice sessions. For this reason, the Italian journalist and Formula One expert is inclined to believe that there is a strong hope it was just a misstep. A weekend where the red team understood little to nothing, a sort of uncalculated anomaly, a bug that infected the system and consequently generated this great apocalyptic disaster. The Ferrari insider supports his reasoning with an interesting conjecture. Until Friday, both team principal Frédéric Vasseur and Charles Leclerc kept emphasizing that Ferrari could compete for the race victory, fighting for pole position and trying to lead the race. This consideration shows that no one within the Italian F1 team remotely expected such a catastrophe. A tremendous disillusionment. The experienced journalist with several links to the Ferrari world is inclined to think that the Prancing Horse completely botched the setup of the SF24 single-seater. He clings to this hypothesis because other logical explanations are hard to digest for the supporters of the historic team, as the scenario that unfolded seemed too dramatic to be true. We return to the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix in Italy, where Scuderia Ferrari failed to get ahead of rivals Red Bull and McLaren. However, in that race, Charles Leclerc crossed the finish line practically on the heels of the car driven by the three-time Formula One world champion. This can happen, and it is part of the competitive landscape we are experiencing, where the balance at the top is so delicate that a small detail marks the competitive difference between the various teams. But when a surreal context paints Saturday, where an SF24 is outperformed by almost everyone, well, clearly, something did not work at all. Starting from the back of the grid is never easy. It complicates everything. And never mind Charles Leclerc, who, as we know, suffered a power unit failure caused by a malfunctioning control unit, a headache that cost the engine about 80 horsepower, roughly half a second per lap in terms performance on wet track and up to 1.2 seconds as the track began to get dry up. But if we look at Carlos Sainz's performance, who as far as we know did not suffer any real problems, we see that his performance was also very limited. For this reason, returning to the discussion about wrong setup solutions seems more than logical. A clear inability to maximize tire performance for Ferrari in this Canadian F1 weekend that only brought disasters. The scenario was so bad, according to the Italian journalist, that it is highly worth believing it does not correspond to reality. Better to file it away as a simple episode and start focusing on the next round of the 2024 Formula One Championship, the Spanish Grand Prix at the Circuit de Catalunya in Barcelona. After all, Ferrari has already won 2 races this season, and before Montreal, the gap in the constructors' standings from Red Bull was not big at all. A gap that could even be reduced in a single race if everything went well for the Italian side and everything went badly for the Austrian team. From a certain point of view, perhaps the double retirement made things less bad than they could have been. Yes, because if we think about it, without Charles Leclerc's engine trouble and Carlos Sainz's close encounter with Alex Albon, the two Ferrari SF24 cars could have easily finished outside the points. And perhaps, in this case, explaining such a performance to the fans would have been even more difficult and painful. According to the Italian journalist, something doesn't add up. Fortunately, the weekend is over and thoughts are already on Spain, where Ferrari has the duty to return to the top without any more excuses. Ferrari therefore suffered their first double DNF in 2 years, as a shocking lack of pace was compounded by Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz failing to finish the race. From the high of Charles Leclerc's victory on home soil in Monaco to power unit issues, mistakes from team and driver, plus tire struggles in Montreal, Ferrari find themselves scratching their heads ahead of the Spanish Grand Prix. Max Verstappen's win at the weekend puts him 56 points ahead of the Monegasque in the Drivers' Championship and left Ferrari 48 points behind Red Bull in the Constructors' standings. Max Verstappen's victory at the weekend puts him 56 points ahead of the Monegasque in the Drivers' Championship and left Ferrari 48 points behind Red Bull in the Constructors' standings. Ahead of the Montreal race, Charles Leclerc believed Ferrari could beat Red Bull in at least one of the championships this year, but those hopes suffered a major blow across the weekend. If Ferrari are to be taken as serious contenders, whether that's this season or not, they cannot afford weekends like this where almost everything went wrong. It's not the first time Charles Leclerc's car has experienced engine woes in 2024 after Ferrari dissected a problem with his new power unit after the Miami Grand Prix. Another problem at the Imola circuit prompted the Monegasque driver to use a third power unit, and he was also given a new energy store and control electronics in Canada, so he's on the verge of grid penalties already for excessive use of power unit elements. Ignoring their tremendous Monaco weekend, Ferrari have been beaten by McLaren in China, Miami, Imola, and now Canada at the 4.361-kilometer Circuit Gilles-Villeneuve in Montreal. They are 40 points in front of McLaren in the Constructors' Championship, but it's the Woking-based squad who have momentum and the more versatile car. Ferrari have traditionally struggled in wet and cool conditions over the last 10 years in Formula One, a trait which unfortunately appears to remain with this year's car. As Formula One now heads to Europe in the summer, there should be plenty of hot races which will help the Maranello team, but they still appear to be not quite ready to challenge week in, week out, despite a massive improvement under the leadership of French manager Frédéric Vasseur, who confirmed that the Italian side will not change the approach and that Ferrari is working as a team, with the drivers in the good and the bad moments.